Well, hi, I'm Ted Robinson, who has been most blessed to be a sports broadcaster for a long time, longer than I care to think about now, but 4 decades long, having had a long run in baseball, a long run with the 49ers in football, a ton of basketball, and the last 11 Olympic Games. And now in the 20, late 20 teens and into the 2020s, probably more seen and known for tennis work on Tennis Channel. I did 20 years of it for NBC, so probably more known for tennis right now than what I had previously done.
Well, when you have such a varied background, how do you get in and out of each thing? Or actually, how did you get started? And then we'll kind of play from there.
Okay, Frank. Well, how I got started was I grew up like so many people who wind up in this business, wanted to be a player. And
Okay.
I was lucky that through a bunch of circumstances when I was in high school, it was pretty clear to me that wasn't going to be my long-term play. So I gave up the short-term play and said, okay, what's next best? And I thought announcing the games was going to be it. So I went to college strictly to pursue this. College was in essence a vocational school for me. I was a ball sport kid, so I wanted to broadcast ball sports. The first opportunity that came up for me was hockey. I grew up in New York, just outside of New York City, and hockey was, even though I played the hockey I played as a kid was street hockey, uh, but the sport was very prominent in New York. So I understood the sport, and hockey became my entree through into my 20s, my first few jobs. Then the opportunity came to morph it back into basketball and baseball, the ball sports. And then probably around age 40, I asked and was given the opportunity to work one Olympics. And I thought it'd be a one and done Olympics. And that was the first experience I really had tackling sports I didn't know. Great, great experience. Tremendous way to conquer the fear of doing something unfamiliar. Extremely confident building. And I've taken that over 20 years to do an incredible number of Olympic sports that I never thought I would know, never thought I would do. And then the last element is what I ended the introduction with. I literally fell into tennis. It was just an opportunity that was given to me. And my first reaction was, I don't know. I mean, I know how to keep score and I know
Right.
who McEnroe and Connors and Chrissy and Martina are, but I don't know tennis. And I was told, that's okay. We have plenty of people who know tennis. We need someone who can be a traffic cop. That's the word in our business a lot. And that started me on a road that was 33 years ago that I could have never dreamt Frank would have led me to work as much high level tennis as I've been able to.
Well, my background, I broadcast one tennis tournament on radio, and I found that to be almost impossible to do
Yeah.
because it was just, then he moved over there, and then there's the ball, and okay, now they picked up the ball, and it was really tough to do. But you've got several different disciplines, and do they have a common theme, or do you look at it and say, okay, if I'm in the Olympics and I'm doing, say, rhythmic gymnastics as opposed to a basketball game, is there, pardon the pun, is there a rhythm to it that you have to find, or does it just, it's all a sport, so it's all kind of the same thing?
There is a formula. And Frank, have you ever heard the BBC do Wimbledon on radio? Have you ever heard a clip of it?
Yeah.
And that's extraordinary. I couldn't even begin to do it. And I've listened to it in car rides back and forth when I'm there to work Wimbledon. I'm in awe. As a radio broadcaster, I couldn't begin to call tennis on the radio. So don't feel bad.
You have to be comfortable with space.
Yeah, but to describe, I mean, obviously radio, the mission is to paint a word picture.
Right.
And tennis points, that to me is so hard. And there's no other sport I can think of, Frank, that's the complete, the two disciplines, calling a tennis match on television and calling on a radio, are as opposite as anything. I can't think of anything in sport, because in tennis, you shut up during the point, right? On television,
Right.
you are basically demanded to say nothing. And on radio, you have to say everything.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy to me. So I said,
It was weird. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you've tried to do it. That's one more than I've ever tried. I've never tried it on radio. All right. So to your question quickly, doing tennis and doing the various Olympic sports has taught me a great lesson that I've tried to bring back to my work in the ball sports, which is to stay in your lane. And it really hit home with me in the Olympic sports. When you're told you're going to go do freestyle moguls and freestyle aerials, skiing, and short track speed skating, all in the same Olympic Games. And I don't know anything about any of them. What you find out is you have somebody with you who played and or coached the sport. So you figure out this is what's happening. This is the structure of the competition. This is who's competing. This is how the medals will be determined. And then once they start, you let your partner explain why it's happening. Why are they doing this? Why did they do that? Why did the score come in this way? And it's quite frankly, it's the way all broadcasting should be, but all of us, because we played ball sports and we think we know more about it,
right.
We all are guilty, all of us, of sometimes veering out of our lane when we're doing a baseball game or a basketball game. And so to how that theory applies to tennis, by far and away in my career, the greatest array of commentators, and I'm not talking as much talent-wise as I'm talking about achievement, has been in tennis. The greatest champions in the sport have all done commentary, and I've worked with basically every one of them. I mean,
I thought about that. Right.
Yeah. People know John and McEnroe and I have had a long-running professional relationship that's been great. I worked with Martina, still work with her tennis channel. I worked with Chrissy for years, Jim Courier, Lindsay Davenport, Jimmy Connors did some work for Tennis Channel. I had a chance to do a little bit with Jimmy. So in terms of American tennis, you know, the people that haven't, Sampras has never done it. Andre has done one match in his life. That was with myself and John at a U.S. Open. Who else? I mean, basically in American tennis, and of course, because they can speak English, the greatest players have all done commentary. You don't have Hall of Fame baseball players very often doing baseball commentary. Tom Brady's not going to retire and go do Sunday football. It ain't going to happen.
Right.
And Peyton Manning does it. Joe Montana hasn't done it. I mean, the greats, a few do, but not to the numbers that tennis has. So to your question again, Frank, it's something I keep kicking myself to do. And I tell my partners often, if I start to veer into your lane, hit me. Euphemism, hit me, stop me, because, and finally, Frank, it's how I've learned about tennis. I've learned tennis in the greatest. I've had, you know, they had this thing online that we've seen during the pandemic called Masterclass. You can sign up and subscribe and have all these experts in various fields teach you at cost about their profession. Well, I've had that in tennis, and it's been unbelievable. It's been a strict result of the people that I've had the incredible ability to work next to.
Well, what I've found with most people in tennis is they can't get away from it. Even though they may not be competing professionally or at that level anymore, they're still involved in it some kind of way. I had the good fortune to talk to Johan Kriek a couple months ago. And the gist of it was, well, why would I stop? You know, it's like, why would I stop playing? Why would I stop being involved? He has his academy. I'm around it every day. Yeah. I used to be around it every day. Why would I quit? I still love it. I just don't compete at that level anymore. Even when he played on the senior tours, like, it's still a chance to go out there and be involved in the sport. And I don't know that I find that, like you said, in other sports. There aren't a lot of, you know, hockey players that say, I have to stick around once I'm done. Mm-hmm. You know, there are some, but like you said, it's not like you're going to see them in the booth and doing this all the time.
Yeah. So tennis former players, retired players, depending on their level of success, obviously have a reputation, have a name, have credibility. So like Johan went to Naples, Florida, and he became a club pro there and, you know, ran a club and probably gives lessons to select people. You can do that. You can play on the seniors tour, which John McEnroe is still doing at 61 years old. There is a traveling exhibition tour that goes through America right now that Jim Courier actually is running. You can do commentary. Many of the best commentators, many of the champions if you think about tennis, there's four. It's like golf. There's 4 major championships a year. In tennis, they're 2 weeks each. So if you just did the 4 majors of commentary, that's 8 weeks out of your year, out of 52. That's what John McEnroe does. He only does commentary 8 weeks a year, but you can make a decent amount towards your living in doing that. There are not many great players, great champions who do the regular season tennis tour as a coach or commentator. It's a lot of travel. It's a lot of, it's just a lot of your years, and it's what they did. It's what they just finished doing as a player. So to keep doing that doesn't appeal. And look, if you were 50 or 60 in the world was your best rank, you probably didn't make enough money to just quit and retire at 30. So coaching a good player,
right?
When you watch major championships, many of the coaches of top players were players themselves. Most of them had some success, but they ended up in that, so to speak, middle group.
Like Magnus Norman, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, Magnus Norman actually got to be number 2 in the world.
Right.
It didn't last as long up there.
That long, but right.
But even a Magnus probably didn't make an abundance of money. He probably did fine, but he didn't set himself up for life. Right. Like Pete, Andre, Chrissy, Martina, probably all they were good for so long. You'd like to think they did. So anyway, that's the tennis situation that you talk about with Johan. But the willingness to finish, Frank, the willingness of the great players in tennis to stay connected to the sport in some way, to me, is better in tennis than I've seen in any other sport.
Yeah. Now, jumping back to the Olympic experience, you said 11 Olympics, winter and summer?
Both. Yep.
Okay. Now, I don't know if this is going to be tough to come up with, but what did you learn about the most from a sport that you knew the least about?
I did baseball in my first Summer Olympic Games, 2000. So that's the one exception. That's the one sport I was hired.
Cold. Okay.
Actually, I was hired because I was a Major League Baseball announcer. That's the reason I was hired for that. It was the only, I've done diving in every Summer Olympic Games since, along with some whitewater kayaking. And the sport that I'll tell you the sport that amazed me the most. And it was in Sydney in 2000, which was my first Summer Games. And I was hired to do baseball. Once I was in Sydney, I was told that I was needed to do synchronized swimming. So I'm already in Sydney. So when you get a sport assignment at the Olympic Games, it's normally 6 months to a year in advance. So you do have a chance to prepare. You have a chance to just learn as much as you can sitting in your home, or going to the Olympic trials in your sport, which is what baseball didn't have it, but every other sport I've been involved with, you go to the trials. So you meet you meet the American athletes too. You know who the American athletes are that are going to that do qualify for those games. Didn't have that in synchronized swimming. So I go to the pool maybe 2 days before the first competition and meet my partner, who was a great synchronized swimmer herself in the first, I think, Olympic Games for synchro. And I just say, look, I'm happy to be here, but I don't know anything. So please give me, synchronized swimming for dummies. So she did. She sat there for a couple of hours and helped me. And what I learned, to your question, Frank, it's an extraordinary sport. What the swimmers do is phenomenal. And you don't understand it because when you watch it, you get caught up in music, makeup, costuming. And they don't talk about the actual physical act that these swimmers are doing. It's exceptional. And when I saw it, my jaw dropped. And I realized after the first night of competition, I said, sadly, this is figure skating in the Summer Games. It's exactly what it is. It's the same exact thing as figure skating. And you're judged on your artistic presentation, not the athletic act of treading water for 4 minutes, which 99.9% of human beings can't do. Right? Then do it at the same rate as 11 other swimmers. And then, by the way, throw in all these gymnastic maneuvers. It's insane how good they are. So that, to me, would be the Olympic sport that shocked me the most.
Well, I had the opportunity to interview Leah Panett, who was an Ohio State synchronized swimmer, was on the select team. And the thing that she mentioned to me was, I'm 5'3" and, 108 pounds or something like that. You're not going to pick me out of the crowd to be an athlete. So you're not thinking that, I'm doing anything. The only reason she said people knew at Ohio State she was an athlete was she would go to class with her hair wet because they had, practice before she went to class. And somebody said, you must be doing something. It's like, oh yeah, because the amount of time they spend in the pool and the amount of effort, yeah, you don't think about it. And then the other thing that she brought up that kind of what you mentioned, like, we're all doing this to music underwater.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so
right.
So again, talking about going in with a preconceived notion and having reality so contradict that notion. There's no sport to me that's approached synchronized swimming.
And see, to me, that's the fun of doing this. I think that like you said, everyone has preconceived notions of what they're going to encounter. And it's just blown out of the water, no pun intended, any number of times by what you come across. And a career as varied as yours and as extensive as yours, I'm sure that you run into that. I wasn't thinking this was going to happen. And that keeps it fresh, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's I did, Frank, have learned that through my career. And I started out as a ball sport guy, and I went through a phase in my 30s. And again, a lot of this is rooted in being incredibly fortunate to have had opportunities. And so in my 30s, I thought I was really going to zero in on being a baseball announcer. That was going to be my track and my push. And largely it was tennis because opportunities came along to go do Wimbledon, which is one of the greatest events in any sport. It's just it's the Masters, it's the 500, it's the Derby, it's Wimbledon. It stands on its own. When that opportunity came along, how do you pass on that? And then the French Open, and I was doing U.S. Open tennis, and then eventually the Olympics. Well, it created a lot of collisions with baseball, and as a result, it really eased me out of that baseball track. And what I've learned, though, professionally, was that the variety is good for me. The variety kept me engaged and fresh for a long time. And as opposed to being someone who used to think, yeah, I would love to do 40 years of baseball. My God, what an achievement that would be. And it would be. But then you say, okay, 40 years of going to the same cities every year.
Right.
3 times a year in the same hotels and the same coffee shops. Routine, yes, it'll be comfortable. Variety, keeping your mind engaged, not so. And that's really what I've learned. And it's come, there are trade-offs of everything we do, Frank, in life. There are trade-offs. So yeah, I traded off some security and some stability for the variety. But the analogy I've tried to use over perhaps the last decade is that, and I do believe this, you can tell a lot about a person watching them go through a buffet line. I say to the Las Vegas native, you can tell a lot. When somebody comes out at the other end of a buffet line, what's their plate have? If their plate has 2 or 3 things, then you have a pretty good idea. They know what they like.
Right.
And they're happy with that. This makes them happy. Then you have a person that'll come through with what more looks like what the Spaniards call a tapas plate. A little small sample, 6, 7 things. There, right. 6, 7 things I'm sampling. And by the way, I'm finishing this plate, and then I'm going to go back and get a second plate of 6 or 7 different samples. So I'm going to sample a dozen different things. I'm person 2. That's what I've learned about. That's who I am.
Well, I'll add to that. When I was visiting here before I actually moved here, I'm 6 foot 2.5, 6 foot 3. And I don't really think about it because it's just who I am. It's nothing. It's not like I chose to grow. I just grew. But I was in line next to a young, or actually an older lady who was about 4'10", and she said, "It must be nice to be that tall." And I looked at her and went, So I tried to reach the back line of the buffet, and my shoulders are hitting the sneeze guard. And I said, "Yeah, can you reach that for me?" And she said, "Oh." I said, "Yes. We're all who we are. Exactly. It's just a matter of how we apply it." And if we think that it's anything different, like you said, if I'm going to sample something, I'm going to sample it, right? That's a great analogy.
Well, Frank, you and I are the same height, and I say this all the time when you get that thing about, yeah, it is nice. Of course, it could be an advantage. Then talk to me when we're sitting in row 37 of an airplane.
Exactly.
Tell me if you'd rather be 6'3" or 4'10".
Right. Exactly. And my shoulders are in your seat on both sides. Right. Yeah. Now, when you're doing, again, I'm going to go to the variety again. I'm sorry about that. But when you're in this varied atmospheres, and I don't want you to strike any one person, because once I make the comment, you'll understand why I'm saying it. What great athlete that was accomplished had almost no idea of how to explain what it was that he did or she did? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but they did it so well that they couldn't explain it to anybody else.
I've seen that. I think I saw that more, Frank, that phenomenon in baseball with coaches. There's a story that jumps to mind. I'll tell you in a minute, but I found a decent number of coaches in my time in baseball that were very good players and thought that it would be easy for a 225 hitter to get in the cage and have this coach say, okay, listen, just take that breaking ball, stay back for a second, and just take it to left field. And the 225 hitter can't do that because he's a 225 hitter.
Right, you're right.
He needs to be told and instructed on how he can make that happen so it becomes a 265 hitter. And so I haven't run into that very often that I can think of in commentary, because you wouldn't survive, obviously. You can't. More challenging than not being able to speak is, euphemismly, is learning when to stop, learning how to play to a camera. Those are mechanics of the television trade that I have had multiple times to work with, commentators and folks on how to do that. And some, like even when John McEnroe, and again, I love John, friends, and I've had a wonderful professional time with him. John probably doesn't, to this day, care a ton. He cares more about it than he did originally, but I would still say, he's not the most obsessed person about all the minute details, as opposed to being himself and allowing his personality to show and his intelligence to show, which he does brilliantly. And that's more of who he is. But I would say I have not really, I've dealt with only just a handful of people that I thought, okay, you really need to not do this, in a nice way. You need to find another track here, because this is not going to be a success story for you.
Well, and it's funny because I was thinking about baseball when you said that, when I thought of the question, because I remember, like I said, I grew up in Ohio, and when they hired Frank Robinson, and it didn't work out quite as well as they wanted right away. And that was what you kept hearing. Great players know what they're doing, but it's kind of hard for them to tell other people what it is that they're doing. And, we've seen it with
Ted Williams.
Say a Magic Johnson. Yeah, Ted Williams is a perfect example. Exactly. Yeah. Why don't you see what I see? Because it's pretty obvious to me. My brother is an artist, and I've told him, and he's my older brother, and he said, well, why can't you draw? I'm like, because I don't see, when I look at the corner of the wall, all I see are the wall. I don't see the lines and the angles and all that. And he said, well, it's just there. Yeah, it's easy for you to say.
Yeah,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
A sports dynamic that I've seen a lot, Frank, and it's not a surprise, but a specific story that I was there for. Early in my time, I was a TV broadcaster for the Minnesota Twins. My first year, we had a bunch of veteran players that were winding down to the end. One of them was Steve Carlton, one of the greatest left-handed pitchers in the history of baseball. But he was at the end. He was 44 or something and scuffling to stay alive. And we were playing at Yankee Stadium, and he was getting hammered in the first inning or two. Pitching coach comes to the mound and starts telling Steve, you might want to think about this, that, this, that. And Carlton looked at him and he said, how many games in the big leagues did you win?
Right.
Whoa. So the pitching coach just gave up, wheeled, walked away. And Carlton, that was I'm fairly certain that was the final game he ever pitched in the big leagues. The Twins released him about 3 days later because he clearly wasn't willing to try to make adjustments
Right.
that would have taken him away from who his identity or what his identity had been, right? I've been this pitcher and I've won 360 games doing it. Well, you're not that pitcher anymore.
Right.
And I saw that more in baseball than any other sport without question. And I saw some very good players, and one who I admire greatly, Tom Glavine, made an adjustment. And I was there for that. He made an adjustment to the way he pitched later in his career that enabled him to get to 300 wins. Steve Carlton was past the point. He was already, like I said, 43 or 44. Right. So this was, he's trying to survive another week, another 2 weeks. And he just wasn't willing to go there. But his reaction was to the coach, how many big league games did you win? Was very telling.
I won more in one season than you've even appeared in your life. Yeah,
that was pretty much the answer. You're right.
Yeah. And it's and going back to the Olympics thing, when and this is and we'll kind of tie this in with where we're at this year with no Olympics, obviously, that there is a time frame depending upon the athlete when you are in your prime and when you are not in your prime, even though you still feel pretty good. And it's again a 4-year gap, and you either have to hit that right on the line, or you can be up or you can be down. World record holders that don't make the Olympic Games, and you think, well, how is that possible? Well, they set the world record in 97, but when 2000 comes along, they're not at that peak anymore. Have you seen that happen? Kind of looking at a tennis match and going, this may be the end for this guy, or kind of like the Carlton moment. I'm not sure that he is still able to do what he was able to do, but I don't think he knows it yet, or she knows it yet.
Sure. We all, and it's a hard thing in our profession, Frank, I think, because what we shouldn't do as announcers is tell other people when to stop.
Right.
Or something else, which I strongly detest, that has been a part of, I think it was a part of the sports writing business for a long time and still is, even though sports writing is morphed into online.
Blogging and all that.
And online writing is calling for people to get fired. I just react very strongly in a negative way to that. I just detest telling other people they should lose their jobs. What I would tell you that when you watch an athlete that is scuffling, that can no longer perform to their level, and I've seen women in Olympic sports the same way, I always try to remember what a former player that I worked with as a broadcaster told me once, because he played a long time in the big leagues. And he said, I played until nobody gave me a uniform anymore. Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful when you think.
Yeah.
So he didn't quit. Baseball quit him. That's what he was saying. And I've thought about that a lot because I think that happens to a lot of athletes. I think a lot of athletes can't quit. It's who they are. It's been their identity, especially Olympic athletes in true Olympic sports where it's once every 4 years and the pinnacle is an Olympic medal. And you may have that year, you may be in that zone, but it might be the mid-year. It might be mid-year between the Olympic Games. Can I capture that zone again the year of the games especially the trials? So the trials often are more pressured than the games themselves.
Right.
Because you have to qualify. I mean, the trials in the true Olympic sports, it's one shot. You've got to do it now. There's no selection process like USA basketball has, which is why I personally separate sports. I think there are two categories in the Olympic Games. There are Olympic sports, and there are sports in the Olympic Games.
Okay.
Basketball is a sport in the Olympic Games. It's not an Olympic sport. The pinnacle of basketball is not winning an Olympic gold medal. It might be for an individual, but it's not overall that way. And wait, when the Olympics over, you go back to your team and you play.
Right.
You make a lot of money doing.
You still have a contract, right?
The Olympic sport, it is once every 4 years. It is going to a trials to perform. You're not selected to a team, and then it's going to the games if you make it, and you have one shot, whether it's a 40-second race or a 2-hour marathon run, or there could be a couple of prelim events in your thing. But it's basically one time to perform. This is it, and that's awesome. So when I would say, to finish up, in tennis, I think tennis has become a sport where that vibe that you discussed, I see more prominently, because the sport is so physical. The physical demands of tennis have multiplied just incredibly over the years I've been doing tennis. When you can't reach that level now, it is so exposed. You're out there by yourself in tennis anyway.
Right.
It's boxing. It's one-on-one. There's no people to help. And in tennis, you don't have a corner man, so to speak, either. When you sit on the chair, you're by yourself. So if you can't match the physical standard demanded to play against your opponent on a day, it really shows. And I think Andy Murray's in tennis 2 years ago was the most prominent one I can think of in recent years, where his hip was so bad you could see it. He was fighting it, and he tried immensely, and it was just painful to watch because you could see he couldn't do it.
Right. And it tears him up because he can't do what he loves to do and what he's trained to do his entire life.
He knows it. He knows
it, right? Yeah.
Intellectually, it's the acceptance that's the challenge.
Yeah. Now, and you mentioned something about that when it's time or not time. In the situation right now, I don't want to get political or anything about that, but in a situation right now when we do have some sports, we don't have some sports, just an opinion on how should they, and I guess it's going to get political, I don't mean to do that, but like, for example, college football. Should it be across the board, play or don't play? Or is it because we're looking at different regions of the country, we can play here, we can't play there? Or if you have an event, say Wimbledon, you do play, but in Stuttgart, you don't play. I mean, is there something where you say, let's just cap it, or let's see what we can do? It's just an opinion, not a political opinion. But
yeah, no, Frank, and look, we're all living through this, but as we all know, we're living through something with no manual.
Right.
There's no rule book for this other than stay healthy. And so, for example, just to be specific, college football, we have in our country 50 states, and I think we've had 50 different responses from those 50 states to the virus. Within each of the states, we have counties, and those counties have different responses. Why would college football be any different? College football is spread out throughout all 50 states, throughout the counties in all of those states, and mindsets are different. The cultural preferences are different in different parts of our country. So I understand the cry for a central governing body for college football. In utopia, that would be perfect. I don't think I'll ever live to see that. I understand why we'd like to see it. So let's come back to the real world. Say that isn't going to happen. Right. This is what we're going to see. And I suspect, this is a little bit off your question, but I suspect what may come out of this in college football is an acceleration towards something that I think is inevitable, which is that college football will splinter and mimic a little bit of what the Premier League is like in England, where the top teams across the country, and I don't know what the number, it could be, the Premier League is 20. I don't know what the number, it might be 25 in college football. But these are the schools that, look, it's professional football. I'm sorry, it just is. Right. At Alabama, at Clemson, it's professional football. It's just, let's just
call it what it is. Yeah.
And so just be that way. Be that way. Play that way. They're football players. If they want to be students at your university, that's their option. It's not a demand. And that would completely, to me, help college football in the sense it would rip the charade and the facade completely away from those schools that choose to play football under that mindset. Fine. And I think personally, I think the American populace is fine with this now. I think they're ready for it. It's okay. We get it. We get what's going on here. Just put it out in the open. and there'll be some way you'll figure out to compensate players. That's going to be the tricky thing, as we're learning. But I think this pandemic, coming out of it, the financial destruction that's going to happen to so many universities' athletic departments, not the universities, but their athletic departments, I think is going to accelerate a move. And now this might be another 10 to 15 years before it's reality, but I think it will happen. I think we will see a super division in college football. It'll be the top 20 or 25. And then if you're really smart, if you're college football, you mimic the Premier League and you have a play-in system every year.
Right.
And a relegation if you don't. I mean, I think that is a great technique for interest in sport. And I think college football would be smart to follow something like that.
Well, it's funny. I was I don't normally do this, but to you, I'm name dropping all over the place. Sorry about that. But I had the chance to talk to Willie Banks, the triple jump record holder, or former world record holder, and he said as they were looking at track and field reform, they said, okay, people are coming to see Carl Lewis. Carl Lewis is the show, but in Europe he's getting paid, and he's not getting paid here. So where do you think Carl Lewis is going to go?
Yeah.
And they said,
I've heard that about Bolt, right? I've heard that Bolt broke world records. He was good enough that he could do it. Well, maybe not guarantee it, but have a pretty good chance to break world records when he put his mind to it. And he would put his mind to it at certain meets where he'd be given a guarantee by the promoter.
Right.
But if you break a world record here, here's your bonus. I've heard that story too.
And it's the idea of, okay, let's just, like you said, let's get the charade of it being amateur sports out in the open. And that's kind of, and the dream team as well. It's like, okay, they're not amateurs. Let's just go play.
Right.
So yeah, it's hard to think of that because I'm an old head, but I understand that that's where we're headed. So if that's where we're headed, might as well get there. Yeah.
And I think, Frank, you're right, because I think two things. One is sports fans, Americans, let's just say, have now become accustomed to seeing professional basketball players play in the Olympic Games and NHL players play in the Winter Games. And tennis now, tennis has had some prominence. Golf is now in the Summer Games, was in Rio for the first time. You're accustomed to seeing professional athletes playing in the Olympic Games. Second part, I think, is what's happened in college basketball in the last couple of years now, with more of the pay scandals involving the shoe companies and middlemen. And my personal sense, being around a couple of the universities that have been entangled in this scandal in the Pac-12, fans don't seem to care. I think fans, as a general rule, have come to think everybody's making something here. And they just want to watch and enjoy the game, the competition. So I'm not defending the practices. I'm trying to gauge where I think the general fan base's mind is at.
I think there's like a certain sense of justifiable cynicism. We're going to say that we're up in arms about it, but if our team doesn't make the tournament, well, I'm not going to drop the name this time, but I'm going to go to the ACC. That there's a certain school which you would assume is the high academic standard for everything, and then when you look at who they allow in, as opposed to other schools in the ACC that allow fewer people in because of academics, that comes as a surprise to me. And it shouldn't, because of the way things are normally done. But you would think this is the school that you have to have, a 3.4 and be the academic, summa cum laude and all that. Not necessarily the case. I mean, you still have to be able to get into the school, but not to the level that you would, that I would think. And there was another school that I was told, oh, well, we don't accept people into our school that this school accepts into their school. That puts us on an unfair playing service. And I would have thought it had been the exact opposite of that. So, yeah, I understand what you're talking about, that people don't care. They just want to win, or they want their team to appear to be a winner.
Yeah. That's another problem that I think college athletics, in terms of trying to have a governing central body and basically one set of rules for everybody, another reason why it can't happen is what you just said, admissions. Right. You have the NCAA is comprised of state universities and private universities. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to tell a private university who they can admit. Nobody. There is no law. There's no one that can do that. So again, a private institution can accept who they want, deny who they want. They accept the consequences that go with those decisions. But that's another reason why you can never have this one size fits all model that some fans, and I think some media people start banging out saying college football needs. Can't happen.
Well, Ted, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you expounding on some of the things that I've always wondered about, because, you know, you're in the inside of things, which is great. But also I can see that you're also a fan of what you do, not just a fan of sport, but a fan of people, which I don't know that we get that from a lot of people that do. It seems kind of, as you said, it's basic, but it's not basic.
Well, thank you, Frank. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that, because it is, I made a decision again a long time ago. I was in college and I made this decision because I think, again, you can tell a lot about a person by their career arc. I think there are two kinds of sportscasters. I've always felt there are people who truly love sports, and then there are people that maybe are also inclined to liking entertainment and liking being on the air. The people that truly love sports gravitate towards play-by-play because they want to be at the games, like I did. I wanted to be on the field playing the game. Well, the next best thing there is being there a little bit above the field or a little bit off the court. If you're someone who really likes, you might have been a theater person, you might have been a stand-up comic wannabe or a musician at some point. You like being on stage. Those people tend to become the Sports Center types, the sports talk host types. There's two different types. And I always loved being at sports, and I loved the people. I love meeting the incredible array of characters you meet through coaches and athletes. And the last point I'll tell you is that in my life, at 40 years or so doing this, the diversity that I've been exposed to, that so many people, even in my own family, have never been exposed to, the diversity that sports has presented to me, I treasure that. The number of Black men that I've had a chance to get to know well, managers and coaches who I've worked with very closely at times when it's better now, but in the 80s, for example, when I worked with a few Black coaches, there were not very many. And the stories I would hear from them, Clem Haskins, I worked with Clem for 5 years as he was the basketball coach at the University of Minnesota. Clem was an NBA player had a good NBA career. Mm-hmm. And I remember one night we were doing his coach's show and we had a tape malfunction or something, technical stop. So during this break, he tells me the story. He was the first Black player recruited by the University of Louisville. Clem was from a small town in Kentucky. And he told me about his recruiting trip to Louisville and the segregated bathrooms and the segregated restaurants and the hotels and the signs. And I'm sitting there as a white kid that grew up in New York City, which was a melting pot. There was those concepts, we all heard and learned about them in school, but they seem distant. Right. Here's a guy who lived it. And when he told me that story, that's 30 years ago. And I can remember this story like he was telling me yesterday. And those are incredible learning experiences for someone like me. So that's, you hit a nerve there, which I like you hitting about people, because that's the value of doing this job and being around these kinds of people and the incredible array of people of all races, creeds, and backgrounds that you have a chance to meet in sports. It's fabulous.
Well, I asked you this question off the air, and I didn't mean for it to sound as smart alecky as it was, but now I'm going to ask it. I'm going to clean it up a little bit, I hope. It's when you are I told you one of the things that I appreciate about you is you're doing something and you have John McEnroe over here, and it's just, and you worked with him long enough, but someone like John McEnroe, you say, do you realize that you're talking to John McEnroe? I mean, is that something that registers in your head? It's like, I'm talking about tennis to one of the best guys to ever do this, or Martina, or like, wait a second, or Chrissy, like, we're talking about tennis. You are tennis. Mm-hmm. Does that register, or is it just kind of, it flows into what you're doing?
No, it did at the beginning. And again, as a younger, gosh, as a younger guy, and I just a couple of quick examples. I worked with Paul Hornung doing 2 years of college football, who was, again, in my time, and Paul Hornung was the golden boy.
Yeah.
I did baseball early on with Joe Morgan, who was still, I haven't been in as much touch with Joe the last year or two, but Joe became a friend and I respect him tremendously. And then John in tennis. And what I fought with all of those at the very beginning was awe. And that's not a good thing. In our profession, you can't be in awe on the air. You can't. And it was hard with John. I had to really, because John and I are basically the same age, a year apart, same place. We're from the same place.
New York, yeah.
Same sensibilities, which is why I think we clicked personally as well. At least to me it was. But he was huge. I mean, he was, to this day, one of the biggest people in the history of his sport. And so at first I did a little eggshell walk when I was on with John. And that, was probably good as an entry, easing into it, kind of like going into the pool in the shallow end first.
Right. But
at some point you got to go in the deep end. And that was a challenge for me with John. I admit that. I was a little bit uncertain about that. It worked, thank goodness. John was great. At this point in my life, there's no longer any of that. At some point you get there when I sit down with Martina now, and here's one of the greatest players in the history of her sport. And I know Martina now as this incredibly thoughtful, very opinionated person about our country, about politics, and someone who I'm very proud of her from this standpoint, because I sat one night at a dinner table and told her, Martina, when people attack you for your views, you should at some point just stand up and say, I chose to be an American.
Right.
I chose. Right. And I said, Martina, look at me. I didn't choose to be an American. I didn't choose. I was born into it. You chose. You made an adult intellectual choice and then pursued the necessary steps to be an American. Right. That is an extraordinary thing that you should stand up and wave. And that's, so when Martina sits with me now, that's who I think of. That's the Martina, not the Martina that won 1 billion Grand Slam titles and overcame all kinds of, just overcame, which we all know, obstacles and hurdles because of her life. So the awe part of it at this point in life, Frank, is gone.
Well, does it also get to the point where you are now working with people? And as you said before, it's people. And what I found doing this is that the first question I usually ask is, so how did all this begin? And rarely does anyone say, well, I woke up and I was in the NFL. Rarely does it say, I woke up and I was on center court at Wimbledon. It all started from I'm from a small town here, or I did this, or I played. Mm-hmm. And so we all have a common ground, I think, of where we came from. And it's, if you treat someone with awe, half the time they look at you and go, why are you doing that? I'm just Joe Morgan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a line, I'd say, between awe and respect.
There you go.
And I think that was what I learned, especially working with John McEnroe, was I think John wanted to be respected when he came in the broadcast booth. And I like to think I did. I hope I did. The awe part is what you can't do. Like I said, I learned that right away. And actually, I watched that John had one night years ago, we were doing the U.S. Open together, and John Madden used to come out to the U.S. Open every year for a night. And he would come up in our booth, and he knew, because of his CBS work at the time, he was CBS, he knew all the camera operators and he knew people. So John came on the air with us. John Madden came on the air with us one night during a match. And it was one of the very few times in my life I've seen John McEnroe a little bit tongue-tied, because he so respected what John Madden had done as a commentator. And I've told John McEnroe forever, I think he and John Madden are the two best commentators in my lifetime as a broadcaster, regardless of sport. They are the two people that when they talked, my grandmother liked listening to them. Didn't matter that my grandmother didn't really follow tennis very much or didn't care about the Cincinnati Bengals linebacking core. When John Madden talked, my grandmother liked listening to that.
Right, right. Well, thank you once again, and I hope I treated you with respect and a little bit of awe, but I'll go with the respect angle. So.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.